Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, you're always moving slower than everyone else? Like the world around you is running a race, and somehow you were never even given the signal to start? Look around. People seem to move with certainty. They choose a path early. They accelerate. They build. They achieve. By their 30s, they're accumulating. By their 40s, they're stabilizing. Everything looks structured, predictable, linear. And then there's you, moving through life like you're walking through fog. Second-guessing, pausing, restarting, questioning everything. Why does it feel like you're always behind? Why does your path feel reversed? Here's the truth most people will never tell you. According to Carl Jung, being out of sync with the world is not a flaw. It's not failure. It's not bad luck. It's a sign of a rare psychological structure, one that is not meant to bloom early. Because if it did, if you found success too soon, if you fit perfectly into society's expectations, you might lose yourself permanently. And if that resonates with you, I want you to pause for a second and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And does this feeling sound familiar to you? Because you're not alone in this. For a certain type of person, deep thinkers, highly intuitive individuals, those who crave meaning over approval, the first half of life can feel like being placed in a world that was never designed for you. You keep circling the same questions. Who am I, really? What do I actually want? Is this life I'm building even mine? You try to follow the path everyone else is taking. You really do. But something inside you resists, quietly, constantly. There's a tension in your chest you can't explain. That tension, it's not confusion. It's clarity trying to break through. Your journey was never meant to begin with speed. It begins with depth. And in the next few minutes, you're going to start recognizing something powerful. Traits you once saw as weaknesses that are actually signals. Signals that your unconscious has been sending you for years. So don't rush to label your story as failure. Because what you're experiencing might be the very reason you will reach your peak later in life. And when you do, it will be deeper, stronger, and more authentic than anything built on speed alone. Before we go deeper into this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this kind of self-understanding is rare, and if you're on this path, you'll want to stay connected to it. Now, let's talk about something Jung understood better than most. Life does not move in a straight line. He described it as two distinct halves, two completely different psychological worlds. He once said, "We step into the afternoon of life completely unprepared." Think about that, unprepared, because everything we're taught early on only applies to the first half. Imagine your life as climbing a mountain. In the morning of life, you're moving upward with light baggage. You carry goals, ambitions, identities that are still forming. You move quickly because you're driven by energy, by recognition, by the fear of falling behind. You build what Jung called the persona, a version of yourself designed to function in society. It's like setting up a temporary tent. Quick, practical, just enough to survive under the eyes of the world, and society rewards this. You get praised for getting a stable job. You get approval for following expected timelines. You get validation for fitting in. Everything pushes you toward one simple formula: adapt, perform, progress. But for rare individuals, those driven by truth instead of approval, that formula feels suffocating. It feels like acting in a play where you don't know your lines, because they were never written for you. Every step feels forced. Every smile feels slightly artificial. And deep down, you feel like you're wearing a mask that doesn't just hide you. It compresses you. Jung called this stage the development of the ego. But here's what he didn't say explicitly. Building that ego is not equally easy for everyone. For some people, it's a battlefield, a silent war between what the world expects and what your soul knows is real. That inner conflict, that's why your steps feel heavier. That's why you hesitate. That's why you've probably changed directions more times than you can count. Not because you're lost, but because nothing external ever felt like home. Maybe you've switched careers. Maybe you've struggled to stay in environments that others seem comfortable in. Maybe you've wondered why you can't just be normal and want what everyone else wants. But here's the deeper perspective. You're not broken. You're being protected. Because if you had found something that fit too early, if you had locked yourself into a role that society approved of, you might have stayed there forever. And in doing so, you would have abandoned your true self. Those setbacks you experienced, they weren't failures, they were barriers. Invisible boundaries preventing you from settling into a life that was too small for who you really are. But when you're young, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're falling behind. You watch people buying homes, building families, stabilizing careers, and you feel like you're standing outside the race entirely. That fear creeps in at night, the fear that you're missing your chance. But Jung saw something most people miss. Those who are meant for the second half of life must go through a first half filled with friction, because that friction prevents premature identity. It keeps you searching. It forces your soul to mature. And then, something shifts. Slowly at first, almost unnoticed, the energy that once pushed outward begins to turn inward. And suddenly, everything reverses. What once helped people succeed early, external validation, rigid identity, social approval, starts to lose its power. And what once made you feel different becomes your greatest strength. This is where many early achievers begin to struggle. They reach the top, only to realize they climbed the wrong mountain. They built a life that looks perfect on the outside, but feels empty inside. Their persona becomes a prison. They don't know who they are without it. Meanwhile, people like you begin to come alive. Because you were never deeply attached to the wrong identity. You were questioning it all along. You're no longer controlled by expectations. You're no longer afraid of your inner world, because you've lived there for years. This is what Jung called the afternoon of life, a phase where clarity replaces confusion, where depth replaces speed, where authenticity replaces performance. It's like spending decades watching the ocean from the shore, and finally understanding its rhythm well enough to step in, without fear of drowning. In this stage, everything changes. What once felt like a burden becomes vision. What once felt like isolation becomes independence. What once felt like confusion becomes understanding. You reconnect with yourself in a way that feels almost surreal, as if your soul was waiting for you to become ready to receive the real map of your life. And this is why rare individuals don't bloom early. They're not designed to. They bloom in their own season, not through speed, but through depth. And depth takes time. So if this is speaking to something inside you, don't just listen silently. Comment below with the word depth. Let's see how many people are truly on this path. And remember to subscribe, because what we're about to uncover next will change how you see every struggle you've ever faced. There's a hard truth most people avoid, but if you've lived it, you'll recognize it immediately. The first half of your life wasn't difficult because you lacked ability. It was difficult because you were built differently. And if you've ever carried that quiet, persistent feeling of being stuck, like you were moving against the current in a world obsessed with speed and surface-level success, then what you're about to hear is going to land deeper than you expect. Because this isn't just information. This is explanation. The first half of life is when the world demands something very specific from you. Shape, a defined identity, a clear role, a version of yourself that can be easily understood, categorized, and approved. It's like walking into a store filled with ready-made identities. The successful one, the stable one, the likable one, the strong one. Pick one, wear it, perform it, and if it fits, even loosely, life becomes easier. You get recognition, you get validation, you get rewarded. But here's the problem. No one talks about. If you are someone with a rare psychological structure, you don't fit. Not because you're incapable, but because you were never designed for uniformity. You were designed for truth, for freedom, for alignment that comes from within, not approval that comes from outside. Carl Jung called the mask we wear in society the persona. He said it's necessary. You need it to function in the world. But he also warned something most people ignore. The persona is not who you are. It's a compromise. A negotiation between your true self and what society expects you to appear to be. And that word, compromise, is where everything begins to fracture for people like you. Because you're not just asked to adjust your behavior. You're asked to adjust your nature, your rhythm, your way of seeing reality. Other people wear the mask like putting on a jacket. For you, it feels like suffocation, like something tightening around your throat, like breathing through a version of life that doesn't belong to you. And that's why your early life felt so heavy. Not because you were weak, but because you couldn't survive for long inside a version of yourself that your soul rejected. Think about it honestly. Have you ever had a moment where you were performing so hard, trying so desperately to meet expectations, that you felt like you couldn't breathe? If that moment comes to mind, write it in one sentence in the comments. And more importantly, who were you trying to please? Because sometimes, identifying that one person explains years of exhaustion. But the struggle goes even deeper than not fitting in. It comes from a conflict that most people never fully see, the need to belong versus the need to be real. Every human being wants connection, acceptance, to feel seen and valued. But rare individuals sense something others don't. They see the hidden cost of belonging. They understand that if they are loved for a version of themselves that was edited, filtered, adjusted to please others, that's not love. That's a transaction. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That awareness gives you clarity. But it also brings loneliness, because now, connection feels complicated. You crave it, but you question it. You want it, but you're afraid of what it might cost. So you walk into rooms full of people and still feel like an outsider. You hear conversations that others laugh at, but you can sense the emptiness underneath. And that ability to hear what isn't being said, to feel what others ignore, that's not a flaw, but it is exhausting. There's another force pulling at you too, something even stronger. Meaning, you don't just want to live. You need your life to make sense. You need it to feel real. Maybe you've had that moment. You're sitting in front of your screen, looking at your tasks, your schedule, your responsibilities, and suddenly something inside you freezes. A question cuts through everything. What am I doing with my life? That moment, that's not overthinking. That's your unconscious speaking. And it doesn't speak in neat sentences. It speaks through signals, through symptoms, a quiet fatigue that doesn't go away, a loss of motivation you can't explain, irritability that seems to come from nowhere, a heaviness that lingers, even when nothing is technically wrong. According to Jung, this happens when your external life stops matching your internal structure. Your psyche begins to resist, not with logic, but with discomfort, and there's something else you've likely carried for a long time. Depth, earlier than most. While others were still chasing excitement and surface-level experiences, you were already asking bigger questions about meaning, about death, about truth, about what's real beneath all the performance. You've seen things others ignore. The fragility of status, the illusions behind power, the games people play to feel important. And once you see that, it's hard to go back to being naive. And when you can't be naive, it becomes almost impossible to fully participate in a system built on illusion. It's like being inside a game, but you can see the code behind it. You understand the mechanics, the rewards, the comparisons, the constant performance. And even when you try to play along, something in you resists. But at the same time, another force rises. Fear. The fear of missing out. You watch people move forward. They build lives that look stable, predictable, successful. They get married. They buy homes. They gain status. They secure positions. And a quiet voice inside you asks, am I falling behind? Am I wasting time? Will I regret this one day? And here's where the trap begins. That fear pushes you to try harder to fit in, to force yourself into a rhythm that isn't yours, to wear the mask just to keep up. But every time you do that, You lose energy. You lose clarity. You lose yourself. And so you fall into a cycle. You try to adapt. You feel disconnected. You collapse. You blame yourself. Then you try again. If you've lived that loop, pause for a moment and type, "I've been there," in the comments, because recognizing the pattern is the first step to breaking it. And here's the truth that changes everything. That cycle doesn't prove you're failing. It proves you're not meant to live behind a mask. Not for long. Not without consequences. The reason your path feels slower is because every step you take has to pass through a filter most people never face. Meaning, if something doesn't feel real, you can't fully commit to it. If something doesn't align, you'd rather stop than move forward into the wrong life. And that's not weakness. That's integrity at a psychological level most people never reach. Now, this brings us to something even more powerful. A shift that begins quietly, but changes everything. After years, sometimes decades, of feeling out of sync, there comes a moment where time itself feels different, where something inside you begins to turn. Jung called this moment metanoia, a complete transformation of the mind, not surface-level change, not a temporary crisis, a deep, internal reversal of your entire psychological system. And this doesn't usually arrive in your 20s or 30s. It comes later, often after 45, sometimes closer to 50. And when it arrives, it doesn't need a dramatic event. It can be subtle, silent, but undeniable. You begin to notice something strange. You're no longer driven by the same things. Approval doesn't pull you the way it used to. Validation feels empty. External success loses its grip. And in its place, a new question begins to take over. Who am I without the role? That question changes everything. Because for the first time, you're not trying to maintain a life. You're trying to discover a truth. And while others at this stage feel fear of losing what they've built, you feel something different. Possibility. Because now, you're no longer starting from expectation. You're starting from awareness. And that is where your real life begins. If this is resonating with you, make sure you subscribe and stay with this journey, because what comes next will show you exactly how this transformation unfolds and why your second half of life holds more power than anything you've experienced so far. And here's something most people never expect. At some point, darkness stops feeling like an enemy. It loses its absolute power over you. And that is exactly where you begin to gain an advantage. Because while others have spent their lives avoiding uncertainty, you've been living inside it. You've walked through gray areas for years. You've questioned, hesitated, doubted, explored. So when life begins to shake, when old structures start to crack, you don't collapse the way others do. You feel fear, yes, but fear isn't new to you. You recognize it, and more importantly, you begin to understand it. This isn't the kind of fear that says, "Go back." This is the kind that whispers, "You're stepping outside the frame," and that changes everything. Because after 45, after 50, life doesn't just continue, it changes its assignment completely. And if you are this rare type of person, you don't experience that shift as a loss. You experience it as an invitation to measure your life by a new standard, not by status, not by approval, but by something far more demanding: authenticity, meaning, alignment with what is trying to emerge from within you. This turning point, what Jung called metanoia, is not the end of your youth. It's the beginning of your real life. It's the moment the door finally opens. And here's the strange part. A part you might feel right now as you're listening to this. You've been waiting for this your whole life, without even knowing it. Now let's go deeper, because if metanoia is the moment the direction changes, then the shadow is the reason you can finally accelerate. In the first half of life, most of your energy went into hiding, into adapting, into becoming acceptable. And the price you paid for that acceptance? You locked away parts of yourself. Important parts, powerful parts. Jung called this hidden dimension the shadow. And this is where everything becomes real. Because if your shadow is not integrated, You cannot fully evolve. You're operating at half capacity, like a car trying to drive forward, with the handbrake still on. You might move. You might even progress. But you will never reach your true speed. Think about how you were shaped. You were rewarded for being easy to deal with, for being agreeable, for not causing discomfort. So what did you do? You controlled your anger, so no one would call you difficult. You hid your ambition, so no one would call you selfish. You suppressed your intensity, so you could be accepted. Little by little, you edited yourself, reduced yourself, softened yourself. You became a more acceptable version of who you are, like a rough draft trying to pass as the final version. And you told yourself, if I do this well enough, life will open. But it doesn't work that way, because what you were actually building was a habit of cutting parts of yourself off in exchange for safety. And that habit, it quietly sabotages your entire life, because you cannot create something meaningful while being afraid of being seen. You cannot rise while constantly asking for permission. You cannot break through while your energy is drained by performance. So why does everything begin to change after 50? Because at some point, your system can no longer sustain the mask. Your body gets tired, your psyche resists, and the parts you buried start coming back, not gently, but through signals, fatigue, emptiness, restlessness, irritation that seems to come from nowhere. And many people look at this and say, this is a crisis. But for you, if you're this rare type, it's something else entirely. It's a call to reclaim the energy you buried, the energy trapped in your shadow. And once you reclaim it, everything changes. Because now you finally have fuel, real fuel, not borrowed motivation, not forced discipline, but raw, authentic energy. So let me ask you something directly. What part of yourself have you been hiding the longest? You don't need to explain it. Just name it in the comments. Anger, ambition, desire, the need to be respected. Naming it is the first step toward releasing it. And when that release begins, the handbrake starts to lift. There's a subtle mechanism here that most people never understand. Many people pride themselves on being kind, accommodating, always understanding. But deep inside, there's something missing. Healthy aggression, not violence, not hostility, but the ability to say no, to draw a line, to claim your space. Without that, you become easy to override, easy to drain, easy to redirect. You give your time, your energy, your attention, and slowly, your life starts drifting away from you. Not because you lack talent, but because you lack the force to protect it. You become like a tree with all its sharp edges cut off. It looks neat, controlled, but it can't defend itself, and it can't grow freely. Now here's what happens when the shadow begins to integrate, especially after 50. The first thing you regain is power. You stop fearing disapproval the way you used to. You stop needing to be liked by everyone. You take off that invisible collar, the need to always be easy. And when you stop spending energy keeping everyone comfortable, that energy returns to you, and you start to feel it. You become more decisive, clearer, stronger in your choices. You stop over-explaining. You stop hesitating. You move faster, not because you're rushing, but because you're no longer blocking yourself. The second thing you regain is real ambition, not the kind that seeks applause, but the kind that comes from within. You start pursuing what calls you, not what impresses others. And ironically, because you're no longer chasing validation, you become more effective, more focused, more willing to do what others avoid. And that's where real success begins to take shape. The third shift is the most powerful of all. Your shadow stops destroying and starts creating. When you're younger, your suppressed energy leaks out in uncontrolled ways. Anger becomes impulsive, ambition becomes scattered, desire becomes confusing. But after years of experience, that same energy becomes refined, focused, condensed, like pressure turning coal into diamond. And this is why late success is often more stable, because it's not built on impulse, it's built on integration. Now, this leads to something even greater, something that only becomes possible in the second half of life. Synthesis. At some point, you begin to see through the illusion of rightness. You realize that many of the rules you followed were never absolute truths. They were just structures, cages, painted to look like virtue. And when you see that clearly, you don't just reclaim your boundaries, you reclaim your wholeness, the right to exist as a complete human being, not edited, not reduced, whole. And when that wholeness returns, something extraordinary happens. The pieces of your life begin to connect. All those years that felt random, confusing, even wasted, start to make sense. Paths that seemed like detours reveal themselves as preparation. Experiences that felt disconnected suddenly align. It's as if something invisible has been gathering the fragments of your life this entire time, waiting. And now, it places them in front of you and says, "Look again. This is the real picture." This is the gift of the second half of life, the ability to synthesize. When you're young, life rewards specialization. Pick one path, go straight, move fast. But later, a different kind of intelligence emerges, the intelligence of connection. You stop seeing life as separate pieces. You start seeing patterns, links, meaning across time. And here's the key truth. This ability would never exist if you had lived a simple, linear life. It was born from your wandering, from your questioning, from the years you thought you were lost. So if you've ever judged your path, if you've ever thought you wasted time, pause and write this in the comments. My path had a purpose, because what you're about to understand next will completely change how you see everything you've been through. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe, because the final part will bring all of this together in a way that will stay with you long after this video ends. You thought your life was scattered, like a suitcase thrown open, filled with pieces that never belonged together. You studied one thing, then abandoned it. You built something, then walked away. You loved someone, then realized they were not who you truly needed. From the outside, it looked inconsistent, unstable, disconnected. And maybe, for years, you believed that too. But then something begins to shift, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. You start noticing something you couldn't see before. Connections, invisible threads running through everything you've lived. What once felt random begins to reveal structure. Someone who studied design and later moved into education suddenly understands how visuals shape attention, memory, and behavior. Someone who worked in sales and then turned to psychology can hear what's hidden behind a simple sentence like, "I'm just looking." Someone who grew up in a wounded family and later works inside organizations can recognize dysfunction instantly, because they've lived it before, just under a different name. These are no longer fragments. They are a system. And this is where something extraordinary happens. In a world drowning in information, you develop the rare ability to understand. Because today, knowledge is everywhere. Endless streams of data, opinions, news, advice, everything colliding at once. And yet, most people are overwhelmed. They consume more and understand less. But you don't just absorb, you interpret, you connect. You step back and ask questions others don't. How does this connect to that? Where have I seen this pattern before? What is repeating here beneath the surface? And the moment you start asking those questions, you stop being a consumer of information. You become someone who deciphers reality. You can see this clearly in real life. There are people who are fast, capable, highly efficient. But when they face complex problems, real problems, they freeze. A relationship falling apart, a person dealing with depression, an organization collapsing internally. They look for simple answers, quick fixes, clear formulas. But you already know something they don't. You know that real problems are never simple. They are intersections, layers, histories colliding. You see how personal wounds, family dynamics, social pressure, unspoken fears, and unmet needs all weave together into one situation. You don't just see events, you see systems. And because of that, you can stand in the middle of chaos without being swallowed by it. That's not common. That's not ordinary. That's rare. And if you're recognizing yourself in this, pause for a second and type, "I see patterns" in the comments, because that ability alone sets you apart more than you realize. Now, here's why the world actually needs you, in two very specific ways. First, the world needs people who connect knowledge, because we are entering an era where everything overlaps: technology, psychology, economics, culture, ethics, artificial intelligence, human emotion, all colliding at once, and shallow thinking cannot handle complexity. It fragments, it argues, it simplifies, but deep thinking integrates. You understand that a business decision is never just about numbers. It's about fear, ambition, recognition, identity. You understand that a social trend is not just a trend. It's a collective pattern trying to express something deeper. You understand that a personal struggle is not just behavior. It's history, operating beneath awareness. You were never meant to stay inside one narrow lane. Life forced you to see wide, and that wide vision is becoming more valuable than ever. Second, the world needs people who can see through symbols. Jung didn't just look at behavior. He looked at patterns, dreams, archetypes, recurring themes across different lives. And after everything you've lived, you begin to see those patterns everywhere. You see the man who needs control, because deep down, he fears abandonment. You see the woman who keeps saving others, because no one ever saved her. You see the person who laughs the loudest, because something inside feels empty. You don't just see people, you see the story moving through them. And once you see the pattern, you're no longer easily fooled by appearances. You're no longer manipulated by surface-level narratives. You see what's underneath. And that clarity, it creates something unexpected. Trust, not blind optimism, not false positivity, but a quiet, grounded trust in your own life. You begin to feel something like, there was a reason for all of this. The detours, the confusion, the years that felt wasted, they were not random, they were preparation. You start to realize you've been collecting something this entire time. Experiences, perspectives, insights, like someone gathering stones from different places without knowing why. Until one day, you see it clearly. You have everything you need to build a bridge between worlds most people can't connect, between knowledge and experience, between logic and emotion, between the individual and the collective. And when that realization lands, something inside you stabilizes. A different kind of confidence appears. Not loud, not performative, but unshakable. The feeling of, I have something real to offer, and in a world where everyone is speaking. That kind of grounded presence stands out. People may not understand it immediately, but they feel it around you. Things become clearer, less chaotic, less tangled. Now, there's one more layer to this, something even deeper than vision. Because understanding your life is one thing, but being strong enough to live it is something else entirely. This is where resilience comes in. And this is where your real power was forged. Not in moments of success, but in silence, in struggle, in starting over, again and again, without recognition. You've had to rebuild yourself more times than you can count. And at some point, starting over stopped feeling like failure. It became a skill. Think about that. Most people fear starting over. You've survived it multiple times. And that changes you. Because now, you know something others don't. You know you can endure. You know you can fall and still continue. You know that nothing external fully defines you. That kind of resilience is not glamorous. It doesn't look impressive from the outside, but internally, it creates something powerful. A psychological endurance, the ability to walk through long periods of uncertainty without collapsing, without needing constant reassurance. Every time you fell, you learned something, not just about the world, but about what actually matters. You lost things and realized you could still breathe. You lost people and realized you could still stand. You were misunderstood, rejected, judged, and you kept going. At first, those experiences felt like punishment. Later, they became perspective. Because you begin to see, failure is not what breaks people. The belief that failure defines them is. And when that belief dissolves, you become free in a way most people never experience. Now compare that to another path. Some people move through life smoothly. Opportunities come easily. Stability arrives early. They grow fast. They shine quickly. But that smoothness has a hidden cost. It can make them fragile. Like a plant raised in perfect conditions, strong on the surface, but untested, unprepared. And when real pressure comes, they break. Because they've never had to discover what cannot be taken from them. But you've already been tested. You've already lost, already rebuilt, already faced uncertainty. And that has given you something rare, inner solidity. Resilience also gives you another advantage, the ability to stand inside uncertainty without panicking. Because most suffering doesn't come from events themselves. It comes from the unknown that follows. What now? Where do I go? What does this mean? And if you've never faced enough uncertainty, you cling, you rush, you try to escape the discomfort. But you've lived there. You've walked through the fog, and you've learned something most people never do. The fog doesn't last forever. So instead of collapsing, you stay. You observe. You move when it's time. If this part of your story feels real to you, type, "I'm still standing" in the comments, because that alone proves something powerful. You didn't just survive your path, you were shaped by it. And what's coming next? We'll show you exactly how all of this turns into your greatest advantage. There's a moment that separates people who collapse from those who finally rise. It's not when everything becomes clear. It's when nothing is clear, and you still don't rush into the wrong life. Most people cannot tolerate uncertainty. They need answers immediately. They need direction, structure, certainty, even if it's false. So what do? They grab the first thing that feels solid, the first opportunity, the first relationship, the first identity that gives them the illusion of ground beneath their feet. Not because it's right, but because it ends the discomfort of not knowing. And that's how entire lives are built on escape. But you, if you've fallen and risen more than once, you've developed something rare. You don't need immediate certainty to keep moving. You've learned how to stay in the unknown without panicking. You can sit inside the fog without forcing a direction. And that changes everything, because now you can distinguish between two very different forces: natural fear and imagined panic. Natural fear is honest. It tells you something matters. Imagined panic is noise. It rushes you into decisions that don't belong to you. And when you learn to separate the two, you stop making choices just to escape discomfort. You start making choices that actually align. That's why, in moments of crisis, you're often the calmest person in the room. Not because you feel nothing, but because you understand something others don't. In uncertain seasons, the most important thing is not speed, it's clarity, because one wrong decision made out of fear can cost years. Now here's where resilience becomes practical, real, tangible. You stop being terrified of losing everything. Not because loss doesn't hurt, but because you've already lived through it. You've seen things collapse, plans fall apart, money disappear, stability vanish. You've had moments where you had to start from zero, or even less than zero, and you survived. So now, loss is no longer the end of the story. It's a phase, a stretch of road, something with an ending. And that gives you an advantage most people will never have. You dare. You take risks others avoid. You step into opportunities others hesitate in front of. Because you know, even if everything falls apart, you can rebuild. And that knowledge, that's power. There's another layer to this resilience. Something even more refined. The ability to repair yourself. You know your limits. You recognize your signals. You understand when to push and when to step back. You don't ignore exhaustion. You don't glorify burnout. You adjust. You realign. Resilience doesn't make you rigid. It makes you flexible, like bamboo, able to bend under pressure, but incredibly difficult to break. And this is why you peak later. Because reaching your peak isn't just about talent. It's not just about intelligence or timing. It's about capacity. The capacity to carry something bigger, a new version of yourself, a greater responsibility, a deeper life. And many people, even capable, intelligent people, fail here. Not because they lack ability, but because they've never carried anything heavy before. So when the real opportunity arrives, they hesitate, they delay, they sabotage themselves, they create excuses, they retreat. Because stepping into that next level requires weight, and they're not used to it. But you've been carrying weight for years. Which means, when your moment comes, you don't break under it. Now, there's one final test, a subtle one, and this is where everything can either stabilize or collapse again. Once you rise, can you stay there? Can you protect your energy long enough to build something meaningful? Because at this stage, your biggest threat is no longer failure. It's leakage, small things, daily drains, invisible losses of energy that slowly pull you away from what matters. And this is where you must become deliberate. Protecting your energy is no longer optional. It's a principle, a way of living. Because deep individuals like you are not drained because they are weak. They are drained because they are open. Too open. You feel quickly. You understand deeply. You care intensely. And because of that, you give your attention, your time, your emotional space. You hear someone's pain, and you want to carry it. You sense discomfort, and you want to fix it. But without boundaries, that becomes leakage. You slowly empty yourself, without realizing it, until one day, when something truly meaningful appears, you have nothing left to give. So let's make this real. You need boundaries, not as walls, but as structure. Clear rules for your energy. Who enters, how they enter, and how long they stay. Start with something simple. After every interaction, ask yourself, do I feel lighter or heavier, clearer or more confused? Some people stabilize you, others drain you. Trust that signal. Don't justify it. Don't override it with guilt. Understanding someone does not mean allowing them to use you. Here's a powerful boundary. If every interaction leaves you exhausted, doubtful, or guilty, reduce. Reduce the frequency. Reduce the time. Reduce the depth. That alone can change your life. Second, set access levels. Not everyone deserves your depth. And one of the biggest mistakes deep people make is revealing too much to the wrong people, then feeling hurt when they're misunderstood. Protect what is still growing inside you, because not everything needs exposure. Some things need darkness, like a seed. You don't take a seed into the middle of a crowd and expect it to grow. Protect it until it's strong enough. Third, learn to say no, without explaining, without justifying, without performing goodness. I'm not available. I'm not the right person for this. I'm not doing that. That's enough. Every extra explanation is a thread tying you to someone else's expectations. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You owe yourself honesty. And yes, people will be uncomfortable when you change. That's part of it. If you don't accept that discomfort, you'll pay with your energy, your health, your time, your peace. Fourth, Let go of the need to be liked. This one is subtle, because it often hides behind morality. I should be kind. I should be understanding. I shouldn't disappoint people. But underneath, there's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being judged. And that fear turns you into someone who constantly adjusts, watches reactions, edits themselves, trying to keep everyone comfortable. But here's the truth. You cannot live honestly and please everyone at the same time. Some people will not like you when you become real. That's not failure, that's alignment. Fifth, reorganize your life around one principle: energy first, schedule second. Don't let your calendar decide your life. Let your energy decide your calendar. Protect your most focused hours. Turn off distractions. Say no to what doesn't matter. Create space for what does, because how you use your energy is how you shape your life. Sixth, pay attention to one thing in every relationship. Do they respect your boundaries? Not your words, your boundaries. A respectful person will not pressure you, will not punish you for saying no, will not make you feel guilty for needing space. Someone who doesn't respect you will test you, push you, make you explain, make you prove. So watch carefully. How do they react when you set a limit? That tells you everything. Now take a breath for a second, because if you've followed all of this, something inside you may have shifted, maybe for the first time. You're not thinking, I'm behind. You're thinking, I've been moving in my real rhythm. And that changes the story completely. There are lives built on speed, and there are lives built on depth. Yours was never meant to be rushed. It was meant to be understood. So stop trying to catch up. Stop trying to compress your path. Stop trying to prove something to people who don't understand it. What matters now is not fixing the past and not sprinting into the future. It's honoring what you've learned, protecting what is emerging, and living in a way that no longer betrays who you are. You don't need to convince anyone your path makes sense. You don't need approval. You don't need permission. You need alignment. And once you have that, something quiet but powerful settles inside you. You no longer apologize for existing. So if you've ever felt like you missed your chance, listen carefully. Your life is not defined by being early or late. It is defined by one thing: whether you have the courage to finally step forward as your real self. If this message reached you at the right moment, subscribe and stay connected, because this is not the end of your story. This is where it actually begins.